Hi. When we first looked at factorizing, we started by finding common factors. This is probably the most important thing to remember when working with factorization. You need to look for common factors in every expression you work with. It does not matter what it is. Remember that a factor is common because it appears in every term. This can help us factorize quadratics where the coefficient of x squared, which we call a, is not 1. Let's look at an example. Factorize the following expression: 2x squared minus 14x plus 24. Now, all three of these terms have even numbers. So let's divide by 2. So we can say 2 outside the bracket. 2x squared divided by 2 gives us x squared. Negative 14x divided by 2 gives us negative 7x. And positive 24 divided by 2 gives us positive 12. Now we have a quadratic within the bracket where the coefficient of x squared is 1. So let's factorize this quadratic. So we're going to say 2. Let's open our brackets. The first term is x squared, so we put x over here, and we put x over here. Now we need to find our constants. Our constant in the quadratic is positive 12. So let's find the factors of 12. We have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. 12 is positive, which means both factors will be positive or both will be negative. The coefficient of x is negative 7, so we know that both factors will be negative. So we say negative 1 minus 12, and we get negative 13. Negative 2 minus 6 gives us negative 8. Negative 3 minus 4 gives us negative 7. This is the coefficient of x over here. So we can see that in the brackets, we will have x minus 3 and x minus 4. Let's look at another example. 3x squared minus 3x minus 18. The coefficient of x squared is 3. The coefficient of x is 3, and the constant is 18. All three of these terms are divisible by 3. So let's take 3 out as a common factor. And we say 3, open bracket, 3x squared divided by 3 gives us x squared. Negative 3x divided by 3 gives us negative x. And negative 18 divided by 3 gives us negative 6. Okay, our next step is to factorize the quadratic within the bracket. So we can write our 3 outside of the bracket and our 2 brackets over here. We have x squared, which is the first term, so we can put x over here and x over here. Our constant is negative 6. So let's find the factors of 6. We have 1 and 6, and we have 2 and 3. 6 is negative, which means one factor will be negative. We have a negative 1 as the coefficient of x, which means that the greater factor will be negative 2. So we can say 1 minus 6, which gives us negative 5. 2 minus 3 gives us negative 1. This is the same value as the coefficient over here. So for our brackets, we're going to say x plus 2, x minus 3. Let's do one more. Now, this is a little bit different to what you've looked at in the past. And a lot of students say, okay, well, we know we need to expand the bracket. Please don't expand the bracket. Remember that simplification is expansion. It's getting rid of the bracket. Factorization is creating the brackets. Now we have got 4 outside the bracket here, and we have negative 24, which is divisible by 4. So let's take 4 out of this equation. So we can say 4, open bracket. We now have a squared. We have negative 5a. And negative 24 divided by 4 gives us negative 6. Now we have a quadratic that we can factorize. So let's write the 4 outside of our 2 brackets. Now a squared is the first term in the quadratic. So we know that a will be the first term in the first bracket and the first term in the second bracket. Now our third term in the quadratic is negative 6. So let's find the factors of 6. We have 1 and 6, and we have 2 and 3. 6 is negative, which means one of our factors will be negative. The coefficient of a, which is our middle term, is negative 5. So we know the greater factor will be negative. So we can say 1 minus 6, and we get negative 5. So we know that within our brackets, we'll have 1 and negative 6. So we can write them over here, plus 1 minus 6. And we have now completed this question. But what happens when we don't have a common factor in the quadratic? How do we factorize them? When we looked at the expansion of binomials, we looked at an example like this. We expanded the brackets using the FOIL method, and we added like terms, and we got our answer. Now, what happens if this over here is the equation, and we need to get back here? There are numerous ways that we can do this. We still need to create two brackets. We start with the square root of the variable in the first term. Let's say our variable in the quadratic is x squared. So we'll have x in the first term of each bracket. Now, because a, the coefficient of x squared in the quadratic, is no longer 1, x in the bracket will now have a coefficient. Let's call these coefficients p and q. When we multiply p and q together, our answer needs to be the coefficient of x squared in the quadratic. Finally, we need to add our constants to the bracket. Let's call them s and t. So our brackets will end up like this. Remember that when we multiply s and t, our answer needs to be the constant in the quadratic. From this, we can see that p and q must be the factors of the coefficient of x squared, and s and t must be the factors of the constant. But which factor do we put into which bracket? How do we know if we are right in the exam situation? I would like to show you a little trick that can make factorizing quadratics much, much easier. Let's use the equation above. 2x squared plus x minus 15. X squared is the variable in the first term. So let's draw our brackets and put in our x's. I'm going to draw a big X up here, as I find it really helps, but it is up to you if you want to draw the X or not. Now, the first thing we have to do is we take the coefficient of x squared, which in this case is 2, and the constant, and we multiply them together. So over here, I'm going to say 2 multiplied by negative 15, and I get negative 30. I'm going to write negative 30 up here. Next, we look at the coefficient of the middle term in the quadratic. Our middle term is x, so the coefficient is positive 1. Let's write it over here. Now we need to find factors of negative 30 that when added together give us positive 1. So let's start by writing down the factors of 30. We have 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. We have negative 30, which means one factor will be negative. But we have positive 1, which tells us that the lower value will be negative. So let's add these combinations together. Negative 1 plus 30 gives us 29. Negative 2 plus 15 gives us positive 13. Negative 3 plus 10 gives us 7. Negative 5 plus 6 gives us 1. This is the value that we were looking for over here. So we know the factors we need to look at are negative 5 and 6. So over here, let's write negative 5. And over here, let's write 6. Now we're almost done. There's one more thing we need to do. We need to divide negative 5 and 6 by the coefficient of x squared. Over here, the coefficient of x squared we can see is 2. So we say negative 5 over 2 and 6 over 2. Then we need to simplify these fractions. Negative 5 over 2 cannot be simplified anymore, so we can leave it as it is. 6 over 2 is actually 3. So we're going to write it as 3 over 1. Now we use these fractions to fill in the brackets. The rule is that the denominator of the fraction becomes the coefficient of the variable, which in this case is x, in the bracket, and the numerator becomes the constant. So in this case, we've got a denominator of 2, so it becomes 2x, and then we have a constant of -5, so we say minus 5. On this side, we have a denominator of 1, 1x is simply x, and then we have positive 3, which we put in here. Let's tidy this up a little bit. We can see that this is correct because these are the brackets we started off with at the beginning of the example. Let's look at another one. 3x squared minus 14x plus 8. Let's put in our big X. Now we start by multiplying the coefficient of x squared, which is 3, by the constant of 8. And we say 3 multiplied by 8, which gives us 24. Let's put 24 up here. The coefficient of the middle term is -14. So we say -14 over here. Now we need to find factors of 24 that when added together give us -14. So let's write down the factors of 24. We have 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. 24 is positive, which means both factors will be positive or both will be negative. We have -14, which means both factors are negative. -1 minus 24 gives us -25. -2 minus 12 gives us -14. This is the number that we've been looking for. So we know that over here we can say -2 and -12. Now we still have to divide both of these values by the coefficient of x squared. It is 3, so we say -2 over 3 and -12 over 3. Now we simplify. -2 over 3. Now we simplify. -2 over 3 cannot be simplified anymore, so we leave it as such. -12 over 3 is actually -4 over 1. So now we can fill in our brackets. Open up our first bracket. This fraction has a denominator of 3. It becomes the coefficient of x, so we say 3x. Has a numerator of -2, so we say -2. Close our bracket, open the new bracket. This fraction has a denominator of 1, so we have 1x, which is simply x. It has a numerator of -4, so we then say -4. Let's tidy this up a little bit. Let's do one more example. 3m squared plus 5m minus 12. Let's put in our x. Now let's start by multiplying the coefficient of m squared, which is 3, by -12. So we say 3 multiplied by -12, and we get -36. Let's put -36 up here. The coefficient of the middle term is 5. So we put 5 over here. Now we can find the factors of 36. We have 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, and 4 and 9. 36 is negative, which means one factor must be negative. But 5 is positive, which tells us that the smaller factor is negative. So we say -1 plus 36, and we get 35. -2 plus 18, and we get 16. -3 plus 12 gives us 9. And -4 plus 9 gives us 5. So these are the factors that we'll be working with. So in here we can say -4 and 9. The coefficient of m squared is 3. So let's divide both fractions by 3. Now we simplify. -4 over 3 cannot be simplified anymore, and we leave it as such. 9 over 3, top and bottom are divisible by 3. So divide by 3, and we get 3 over 1. Now, in this equation, we are not working with an x variable. We are working with an m variable. So in the first bracket, we're going to have 3 as the coefficient, m, -4 as the constant. Close a bracket, open your new bracket. In this fraction, we have 1 in the denominator, so we just have m. and positive 3 in the numerator, so we say plus 3. Now earlier, we said that we always need to check for common factors, and this still applies here. So let's have a look at this. 16m squared minus 4m minus 6. All of these values are even, so let's divide them by 2. So we can say 2, open our bracket, 16 divided by 2 is 8, so we have 8m squared. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2, so we become negative 2m. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Now that we've done this, we can factorize the quadratic within the bracket. So let's put down our big X. The coefficient of m squared is 8, and the constant is negative 3. So we say 8 multiplied by negative 3, and we get negative 24. Let's put this in up here. The coefficient of the middle term is negative 2, so we put negative 2 in here. Now let's look at the factors of 24. We have 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. 24 is negative, and so is 2. So we know that the greater factor will be negative. And remember, the idea here is to add these combinations together to get an answer of negative 2. So 1 minus 24 gives us negative 23. 2 minus 12 gives us negative 10. 3 minus 8 gives us negative 5. And 4 minus 6 gives us negative 2. So here we can see that these are the factors we are working with. So we say 4 and negative 6. Now remember, we still need to divide by the coefficient of the squared term, which in this case is the 8 in the bracket. So we say 4 over 8 and negative 6 over 8. Let's simplify. 4 and 8 are both divisible by 4, so we get 1 over 2. 6 and 8 are both divisible by 2, so we get negative 3 over 4. Now we can fill in our brackets. So we don't forget the 2 outside, so we say 2, open bracket. Our denominator is 2, so we get 2m. And our constant is 1. Close the bracket, open the new bracket. On this side, the denominator of our fraction is 4, so we get 4m. And the constant is negative 3. Let's clean this up a little bit. Please work through some example questions on this topic before moving on to the next set of videos.